we're going to jump into the next video. It is benchmark review number 1, and I'm using some different software, so I hope you will enjoy the software as much as I have. It's been a challenge to get it together, but I hope you will enjoy it. Anyway, I was supposed to take the most missed benchmark questions and put it into a review, and I figured this would be the most interactive way to cover the missed questions on the benchmark. Almost 90% of what was missed on the benchmark was government questions, which makes sense to me since most of the CRCT is government, and that's one of the things 8th graders have trouble with. So I'm going to try to go in and explain some of this. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the first one. We have 3 different types of mayor councils. Now we know this is at the local level, and I have included for you a definition of a strong mayor council. And it is a form of city government in which the mayor has strong powers to run the city by hiring, managing, and firing staff and controlling executive departments. The mayor also serves on the council. So in this type of council, which is the strong mayor, he or she is involved in the day-to-day operations, whether it's hiring people, managing, or firing. So strong mayor council. Next is the weak mayor council, and the definition is a form of city government in which the mayor has no more power than any other member of the council. So they really can't hire, they really can't fire, they don't do any supervising. They are equal when it comes to members of the council. And the last one is the council manager. Ceremonial is the key word when it comes to defining the council manager. And I put in here to think of the Queen of England. Parliament runs the government, and she gets paid to represent the country. She basically is there to look good and have good public relations. And I put a little question here at the bottom. In which form of local government would the office of mayor be little more than ceremonial? Again, ceremonial is the key word, and again related to the Queen of England. So you got the choices of council manager, weak mayor council, and strong mayor council. So which one would answer this question? And if you chose weak mayor council, you would be correct. Moving on. Qualifications to be elected to the Georgia General Assembly. Now we know that our General Assembly is broken down into 2 houses. One house is the House of Representatives. They call it the lower house. Doesn't mean they're any less powerful, because the House of Representatives and the Senate both are set up in a way to check each other's power to make sure one doesn't have more than the other. So let's look at the House of Representatives first. It's often called the lower house. It's the larger of the 2 houses because there are more representatives than senators. You have to be 21 years old to run for the House of Representatives. You have to be a resident in the district for 1 year, and you have to live in Georgia for 2 years. Qualifications are always on the CRCT, so please make sure that you write these down, commit them to memory, find ways to remember them. And I like to use that this was actually the youngest house that you can run and be elected to, and that's why we call it the lower house. So lower the age, 21, represents the House of Representatives. Next one, qualifications to be elected to the Georgia General Assembly, and we're going to talk about the Senate. The Senate is often called the upper house. You have to be 25 years old, and that's the only difference between the Senate and House of Representatives. Resident of the district for 1 year is the same, and you have to live in Georgia for 2 years. So if you can get the ages right, you should be fine on the test. Moving on. The executive branch of state government. We know it's The governor's in charge of this. Oftentimes he's called the commander-in-chief. And our governor of Georgia right now is Nathan Deal. He is the highest elected official in the state. His job is to enforce the law. And I used the term E squared several times. Remember, he doesn't go out and personally arrest people who speed and who break the law. He has agencies under him like the State Patrol who goes and makes sure they enforce the law for the governor. He also creates and manages the state budget. That is key. The governor creates and manages the state budget. Now, one of the questions on the benchmark was to make budgetary recommendations to the General Assembly. In other words, we should have seen the word budgetary and see inside the word budgetary comes budget. So the governor would make budget recommendations to the General Assembly. Who has to pass the governor's recommendations for the state budget? Correct. The House of Representatives and the Senate. The General Assembly has to pass budgetary recommendations by the governor. So make sure that you understand that. Now, the General Assembly passes bills in order to fund the budget that the governor has set up. So it's the General Assembly's responsibility to make sure that they have the bills passed that they need in order to fund the budget. But the governor makes budgetary recommendations to the General Assembly. Next, county government. We're going to look at Upson County. The Board of Commissioners are in charge of Upson County. Inside Upson County, equal to Upson County, we call ourselves districts or counties. And again, there's 159 counties in the state of Georgia. The counties are to carry out state laws and programs. They can create laws, but counties cannot create laws that go against Georgia law. Remember, county government is ran by the Board of Commissioners, not just by one person, but by a group of people. Georgia Ports Authority. This was one question that was missed, and go back and make sure we understand this. First of all, the Georgia Ports Authority operates 3 ports in the state of Georgia. The Savannah Port, because of the Savannah River. The Port of Bainbridge, because it has a deep river system. And the Port of Columbus. Now, you wouldn't think Columbus would have be operated by the Georgia Ports Authority, but the Chattahoochee River flows through Columbus, and it has easy access to the Gulf of Mexico. Now, we know the Chattahoochee doesn't flow into the Gulf of Mexico, but the Chattahoochee flows into another river, which flows into another river, which flows into the Gulf of Mexico. And I think the question on the benchmark, which one of these is not operated by the Georgia Ports Authority? And the choices were Savannah, Bainbridge, Columbus, and Atlanta. Now, we know that the answer should have been not Atlanta, because there's no deep river or ocean located in Atlanta. So there's your 3 ports authorities, and hopefully there's some clarification on there and you've learned something when it comes to Georgia Ports Authority. Georgia's special purpose governments. Special purpose districts may provide many services, but the services are all targeted on one type of function. And this came from the GeorgiaEncyclopedia.org. And from these choices, here's a question. The General Assembly, the House of Representatives, school districts, and the Senate. Which one is a special purpose government? I'll give you a second to think about that. The General Assembly, House of Representatives, school districts, and the Senate. Which one is a special purpose government? Remembering that all the services are all targeted on one type of function. And if you said school districts, you would be correct, because the school system can only handle school business. They can't go out and change the speed limit. They can't change noise ordinances. They can't go change any kind of law. It is the school district is set up inside Upson County to for a special purpose, and that is to teach kids. Moving right along, here are some examples of special purpose governments that can be set up. Obviously, you see here where it says recreational areas. The Thomas and Upson Recreation Department would be another example of a special purpose government. So there's a list there that you can look at, and hopefully it'll make sense to you. Next, we've finished up the government part. Now we're going to jump in for a brief moment of just various Georgia history terms that we've looked at that we just need to bring back to our memory. First of all, Salzburgers. We're talking about during colonial Georgia. Salzburgers traveled from present-day Austria to Georgia in 1734. Again, this was when Georgia was a colony, again founded by James Oglethorpe and the Board of Trustees. But the reason the Salzburgers came to Georgia was to escape religious persecution in Austria, which is their native country. So we need to connect several words to the Salzburgers. We need to connect Austria to the Salzburgers. We need to connect the word colony to Salzburgers, and also to escape religious persecution. Next, Yazoo land fraud. Legislators took bribes from land speculators. Land speculators told legislators that the land was not worth anything, knowing that it was. Georgia's governor at that time was involved, and some Georgia legislators. The land was bought cheap by the land speculators in hopes that they would turn around and sell it at a more expensive price. And in turn, these Georgia legislators that voted to sell the land at a cheap price was given money, or what we call a bribe, for voting the land to be sold at such a cheap price. Again, this was the Yazoo land fraud. There's always a question on the CRCT dealing with the Yazoo land fraud. Next, Abraham Baldwin, and they purposely tried to trick you on the benchmark when it came to Abraham Baldwin. Again, he was one of the founding fathers because he signed the United States Constitution with William Few. He was the one of the founding fathers of our country, not for the state of Georgia. James Oglethorpe was the founding father of Georgia, and they threw the term founding father into the benchmark, and the first thing we could look at is James Oglethorpe, and it kind of threw us off. They call that a distractor, something that would turn your focus away from actually looking at the question, because you see the word founding father. And I'm going to read to you exactly what it said in the benchmark. It says, which of the following was a founding father and a Georgia representative in the Constitutional Congress? Your answer choices were Abraham Baldwin, Elijah Clark, Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall. Now we know Gwinnett and Hall were both signers of the Declaration of Independence. Elijah Clark fought in the Siege of Savannah, and Abraham Baldwin should have been the choice, but they threw in, like I say, a term to distract you from reading the question correctly. Also, Constitutional Congress and Constitutional Convention are both the same thing. And again, Abraham Baldwin was the founder of the University of Georgia. Next, Jim Crow laws. Remember, Jim Crow laws were after the Civil War, after the end of slavery, and it enforced segregation in public accommodations. And I actually found a picture on the internet where this looks to be a doctor's office or a bus station, but there were separate entrances for colored and for white people. So remember, Jim Crow laws enforce segregation in public accommodations. Next, the idea of New South affecting trade and industry in Georgia. The International Cotton Exposition had nothing to do with cotton. It was about industry. It was about showing off how much Georgia was prepared to handle industry coming to Georgia. Nothing to do with cotton. The New South was to attract new industry. So industry grew in Georgia during this time, during the New South. And the New South was preparing the state for the huge industrial expansion of World War II. So remember, New South International Cotton Exposition was more like a fair, how they would dress up towns. They would show off buildings that were built, hoping that companies would come down, enjoy the weather, enjoy all the tourist things that we had, and in turn would bring their business to Georgia so that we could get away from the agricultural state that we used to be and be more about industry. So remember, New South had to do with industry. The International Cotton Exposition was nothing more than us dressing up the state, showing people how good we are and how we're ready for industry. So that kind of brings us